Hey everybody, my name's Lane Shish. I'm an MS4 who just recently matched into urology at the University of Minnesota, and I'm excited to be able to present to you this AOA specialty video in urology. Because this video is, targeted for a variety of different students, I wanted to cover first, what is urology? Well, urology is a surgical subspecialty that surgically and medically manages female and male genitourinary tracts as well as the male reproductive organs. So they deal with a lot of different things such as cancer, stones, reconstruction of the GU tract, pediatrics, and incontinence. As far as like why urology, why did I pick it? I really liked a good balance of surgical and medicine. You spend a lot of time in clinic, which is kind of unusual for a lot of the other surgical subspecialties, and I enjoyed talking with patients. It's pretty broad. There's many different surgical approaches. You can do it open, laparoscopically. You've probably all seen the robotics. It's pretty cool. There's multiple different settings you can be involved in. You can do the inpatient, you can be an outpatient doc, so there's a good breadth there. You also have many opportunities for fellowship and to sub-specialize into if that's your jam. Culturally, I really enjoy it. I love the people there. That's what initially attracted me into urology. Super great, chill people who just want to have fun. As well as it's flexible. You can choose how much time you want to spend in the OR versus in the office. When it comes to research, you can choose different topics and how much time you want to spend working on research versus clinical, as well as, like I mentioned, the settings where you can be inpatient, outpatient, academic, or community-based. The next thing I wanted to cover is just exploring the field of urology, especially from a medical student perspective. So I divide it into two different boxes. One is preclinical and the other is clinical. So when you're in your preclinical, like MS1, MS2, early twos, I would suggest, looking into shadowing, trying to figure out, is this something that you could see yourself doing? Good ways to do that is to reach out to your regional faculty, ask about connections. You can also reach out to the urology advisor, Dr. Hagedorn, who was awesome about trying to get me in there and see what it's like. Also, a great way to get involved is to do some research. Like I mentioned, Dr. Hagedorn is a great resource for that. She can connect you, especially with reconstructive like research, but if you're interested in oncology, pediatrics, she's also kind of the person who can connect you with those different resources. In your clinical phase, there's a variety of different things that you can do. You can do a 2-week elective. The 4-week elective, you'll do 2 weeks in 2 different hospitals. And then the 2-week elective is just 2 weeks in one hospital. Like you can also continue to do research, and then eventually you'll do a sub-I, which is kind of the more rigorous than an elective, and I kind of talk about this later. As far as the residency and fellowship opportunities, I've listed kind of on this slide a little bit about what it's like, what the field looks like. As far as residency, there's 143 programs with 357 spots as of making this video. Of the programs, the length is 5 to 6 years depending. Most commonly, it's the 5-year program with anywhere between a half and 1.5 years of a surgical internship, and then you move into urology. There's also the 6-year tract, which is pretty much the same thing, except for usually there's a year of surgery involved, So I want to kind of touch on, this is probably what the majority of you are looking for, and kind of touch on the application timeline overview. I've broken it up into the preclinical, so MS1, 2 years, MS3 year, and then MS4 year. I've kind of made it as if you were focused on urology from the very beginning, but if you're not, it's not a big deal. I kind of touch on that later. I wasn't super interested in urology until probably the very late 2nd year, early 3rd year, and that gave me enough opportunities to match into urology. So don't feel rushed there. So I want to focus first on the preclinical years. So in MS1, MS2, I think the most important thing to be doing if you're really interested in urology right now is to try to get out and get a research project going. And it can be in anything. It doesn't need to be urology, but if you want to be more competitive in urology, I think focusing on a urologic type research project is probably best. I kind of mentioned Dr. Hagedorn is a great opportunity or a great resource to try to get that going. But you can also get connected with some of the whammy urologists, see if they have anything, opportunities, case studies that you can get plugged into, or even your Triple I project is an opportunity to do some urology research. Continue to do some shadowing, join the urology interest group, and then focus on your step one. I know more recently the step one will become a pass-fail test, and so I'm not totally sure how that will be impacting the application, the residency application and interview process. For my year, step one was heavily looked into as being a kind of a marker of whether you're going to get interviews or not, unfortunately. So I'm not totally sure how it will impact it going forward, but it's pretty important as of now. So focusing on studying and getting a good score on that is something that's important to do. Now let's shift gears and go to the beginning of your clinical years in the MS3. So what should you be doing? I think continuing research, would be a good thing to do. Increase that or improve your research side of your application. You can take a Uro elective if you'd like. It's not necessary. I ended up not and kind of opting more to doing some shadowing and seeing what's going on there. But I've had other friends that did it and had a great time. As far as getting ready for scheduling and what electives you'd like to do for MS4, this happens towards the end of your MS3 year, but you should be looking to try to schedule a Urology Sub-I. You'll get more information about that going through the advising office. It's also a good opportunity to get some good electives in, like anesthesia or the SICU if you want to not treat yourself well, but it will set you up pretty well for intern year. But also it's really important to leave room for away rotations. I'll kind of talk about that more coming up, but you want to kind of leave some space in the beginning of your MS4 schedule so that you can travel a ways if they're allowing it. I'm recording this during COVID, so I was unable to do aways rotations, but in the past it's been pretty important. Also do well on your step 2, so study hard. With step 1 becoming pass-fail, it's likely that step 2 will become the new proxy, so I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes the more important score in the future. This is just speculation, but UW makes you take it before applying anyways, so just do well on that. Make sure you update your CV, personal statement. You'll get your advisors will talk to you about that. Make sure that you research programs that you'd like to go into. This will help for away rotations. And then in February and March, you should start thinking about applying for away rotations. So let's get moving and move on to your MS4 year. And so I put a little bit of an outline here. It's going to be just generals because my application year was very strange, very different than years past, so my timeline was a little bit different, so I just put kind of nebulous spring, summer, autumn for you to try to key you into when you should be paying attention to different things. So one of the first things you'll want to do, I kind of mentioned earlier, was schedule a Urology Sub-I in either spring or summer at your home institution. So here at UW, there's a variety of different places, I think 5, so you can do UW, Medical Center, Harborview, Children's, Northwest, or the VA. You'll schedule 2 different sites and just bust those out and hopefully do well. We'll talk about that more later. You'll also want to schedule through the VSLO in-person aways if you get the opportunity to do that. Historically, these have been pretty important. You'd want to do 2 to 3 sometime between spring, summer, autumn of your 4th year. It's important to schedule these based off of regions that you would like to apply to or are interested in the future, because if you're showing a preference for the West Coast, you'll get less East Coast interviews, things like that. So you want to think about that. Something that came out of COVID that's becoming more prevalent is these virtual aways. So you'll want to kind of think about whether you register through the VSLO, if they're still a thing, or whether you have to do them through the program's urology website. I'm not totally sure how it's going to be moving forward, but that's something to think about and talk about with advisors. During your summer to early autumn, you'll want to register for the AUA. So like July to September, you'll want to register for the match through the AUA and get your AUA ID number. Then you'll get a ton of emails about this, but ERIS will open. You'll still apply through ERIS to your programs of interest in September through October. Get your personal statement, MSPE, volunteer work, letter of rec all together. And then you'll put that through ERIS and apply to the programs, and it will kind of connect with your AUA, and that's how it'll move through. For me, I got interview offers in early November. My process was new this year, where they sent out all the interviews offers on a Friday, interviews, wait lists, and declines on Friday. You had the whole weekend to mull it over, try to fit them all in your schedule or ask for changes, and then send out all the emails on Monday. And nobody would respond to you unless you sent it out that Monday morning. I'm not sure how that'll be changing, but that's how my process worked. Then in November to January were interviews. I'll talk more about that in the future. Then later in January, rank list was due, and then match happened in early February. So I wanted to, I've gotten asked a bunch of questions from some MS1, 2s, and 3s that were getting ready to apply to urology. So I wanted to touch on some frequently asked questions that I get and some how to be competitive, in my opinion. So first thing, or some of the topics I'll be covering is like research, is it needed? We'll talk about step scores. We'll talk about the Urology Sub-I, letters of rec, just stats on urology residency applications, as well as interview season tips and tricks. So as far as research goes, is it needed? Yes, research is important for urology. Just some experience. You don't need to have necessarily a publication or urology research like I touched on earlier, but it helps to have urology and discuss those things, or urology research and discuss those things during interviews. Are you an MS4 or 3 without a lot of time? I would suggest kind of reaching out, talking with the urology advisor, Dr. Hagedorn, trying to see what research opportunities are available. If you're really late into MS3 or even into MS4, you don't have any research, that might be an opportunity to talk with your advisor, kind of see how competitive you are. Also discuss maybe pushing out applying that year. There are opportunities to apply to urology research fellowships at different universities, which have been able or have improved people's applications tremendously, made them super competitive and be able to get into any program they want. So that's an opportunity, though. You have to push out your match for another year. For me, I actually didn't have much research going into MS3 year. I had an MPH prior to medical school, which helped, but not a lot of urology research. So I ended up reaching out probably early third years, asking about getting involved in some urology projects. Dr. Hagedorn set me up with the reconstruction group. I got 2 good projects out of that. I also reached out to urologists that seemed to have pretty similar interest to me, so I was able to reach out to her, get involved with a bunch of different projects, and it's been a great opportunity. So there's a lot out there if you're willing to look for it. All right, everything's step. A lot of people are asking what step score is necessary for being competitive in urology. So the AUA doesn't really report average step scores, so I'm not totally sure, but based off the Texas Star, which you'll get information on more end of third year, beginning of fourth year, which is kind of a tool that collects people's from an anonymous survey, their information about where they matched, where they applied, what their step score is, how much research they had, things like that. using that tool, I was able to see from I think this is from 2019, that the average step score for those matching in urology was 246, and their average step 2 score was 252. When looking at like urologymatch.com, looking at their step 1 scores, these are kind of the categories that they put about whether you think you should be competitive, whether you should be worried, things like that. So it looks like 230 to 240 is a pretty good score. It maybe don't go for the top tier programs, but you will hopefully get enough interviews to match. 240, 250, you're doing pretty good, and then greater than 250, you're gonna feel solid. Okay, I also get asked quite frequently about the Urology Sub-I, mainly like what to expect, how to do well, and so I kind of made this little chart for y'all. So what to expect: waking up early to do morning rounds just like general surgery. There was many times I was waking up 3:30, 4 just to get there and round on a busy service before any of the other team members got in the room. That's pretty classic. Every single day you'll be doing that. You'll be working with the resident team, like I mentioned, running the numbers in the morning, come up with a plan. Then you'll either go off to clinic or OR days, and kind of that'll be the bread and butter of what you do. At the very end, so at University of Washington, you will have a ground rounds presentation where you present on any topic you'd like. I presented on some of my research that I did, but a lot of people do just an interesting new topic that's come out, doing a little bit of a literature review about that, and do like about an 8-minute presentation on it. Pretty important. Make sure you wear your suit on those days. Some programs do an exit interview, so UW did as well, where you talk with the program director as well as the chair. Just classic interview questions, so be prepared for that. And then also know that this is a great opportunity at the end of your rotation to ask for a letter of rec. So at the end of each 2 weeks, you meet with the director or the program coordinator physician of that site, and you want to make sure that you talk with them, and that's a good opportunity, especially if you did well, to ask for a letter of rec. You also will know that at the end of the urology sub-I at the University of Washington, after you do your program director and chair interview, you'll be getting you'll get a chair interview from them. So that's something that you should be expecting. How to do well. So there's a couple different resources I use. There's the AUA Medical Student Curriculum, which is really good, kind of talking about different topics at a level that we should know, things that you'll be pimped on in the OR. There's the BID MC Urology Onki, if you're an Onki fan. Use that prior to going in, and felt like it helped me just know what to do when I got randomly questioned or had a random patient come into clinic. Had at least a vague idea of what's going on. I've on here on the right Weeders pictured, which you should buy prior to the sub-I. I put the website down below it. When you go to it, it's going to look like a 90s web page. That's exactly what it's supposed to look like, and you'll order it, and Dr. Weeder will send it to you. And then also just have a good attitude. You're going to be waking up really early, having long days, but as long as you just are having fun, wanting to help, wanting to be there and be involved, everybody can sense that, and that's almost 80% of how you do well in the rotation. So just make sure that you have a good attitude about everything. Letters of recommendation. I get a lot of questions about this, and so for the application, you're going to need 3 letters of rec, usually all from urologists. These people will be your research mentors. You're going to get a department chair / program director letter, like I mentioned, after your sub-I, so you don't have to worry about that. And then from aways and your sub-I, you can consider getting letters from just attendings that you worked well with. Like I mentioned at the University of Washington, at the end of every 2 weeks, you meet with kind of the coordinator of that site. If you did well there, you can ask them for a letter of recommendation. They talk with a lot of the physicians you work with, so they have a pretty good idea of who you are and how well you've done. So those are things to do. when. I kind of talked about that at the end of your sub-I or during your exit interviews, and then how. Just ask people. They know the gig. They've gone through it. They want to help out. So if you just say, hey, I feel like I've built a really good connection with you. I think you've been able to see a lot of my abilities. Would you mind to write me a letter of recommendation? Almost always they'll say yes. I wanted to include some of the application stats from this last year, and I'm gonna be totally honest with you. This last year was just bananas. It was weird. It didn't make any sense. We were all virtual. A lot of people got enough interviews that they felt they should be safe and didn't match. So I just wanted to kind of show what that looked like. So this is the AUA's data on the 2021 application cycle. So the application cycle I went through. So they had over 500 people apply, with 481 people putting in rank lists for 357 spots. So and all of them filled. So that was a 74% match rate. On average, people put in about 77 applications to programs, and then the average number of people got 12 interviews. So previously in the past, I was told that if you got above 10 or 11 interviews, you had a 90% chance to match. I think that was lower this year. A lot of people took more interviews. The most competitive people ended up getting a lot of interview offers and taking a lot of interviews. That limited the pool so that people were getting much less interviews. You can see from the Texas Star information down below of the applicants that were marked in 2018 to 2020. The average number of interviews they attended was 16 and got 22 interview offers after putting in an average of 65 applications. So more applications were put this year with a less number of interviews taken or given. So I think for those applying this coming year, right after the initial COVID pandemic, I would expect it to be more similar to 2021, with people being able to do more interviews. So maybe suggesting applying to more and taking more interviews. That would be a good option. I don't know how it will go going forwards, but hopefully it significantly improves. So I wanted to kind of touch on interview season tips and tricks, having just gone through it, with the caveat that my year was a weird interview season. So I'll kind of put it from my perspective, but know that once they go back to in-person interviews, it'll probably be a little bit different. So I'll try to give you that perspective as well. So when I was initially looking into my interviews, I was advised to take about 14 to 16 interviews, but anywhere between 10 and 20 is good. I ended up taking 19 interviews, and I was offered about 24. During that whole process, you want to make sure that you take time off from your clinical duties during this interview. So early December, if you can, all of December, if that's possible. I ended up taking the end part of November and December off because it fit in my schedule to do interviews, and I'm very thankful I did that, because I had some days where I had 6 interviews a week. And they're long interviews. They're about 6 hours long. So you will not have time or energy to be able to do any clinical activity. So make sure that you try to do that. Another tip that I have is from while I was interviewing. Everything is a blur. You do so many different interviews, talk to so many different people. When you're done at the end of the week, you won't remember what the first interview that week was like. So what I ended up doing was having an Excel document where I just, after every interview, before logging off and doing anything, still in my suit, would pull up that Excel document and just wrote out my impressions of the program. What the residents were like, what the program felt like, what the faculty felt like. Outside of work stuff, like what was the city like, and then just an overall impression of how do I think I did in the interview, and then overall did I like the interview. Most of them feel pretty similar, but there are some programs where you're like, wow, that felt significantly different. They seem more intense, or seem way more focused on this one thing, and I don't know if I really like that. So make sure that you write those down so when you're making your rank list, it makes it a little bit easier. I also wrote take step 2 earlier, with step 1 becoming, pass fail. Step 2 may becoming more and more important. I took step 2 right at the end of 3rd year, beginning of 4th year. Took some time off to do it, and I think it helped, especially if you're going to do well or have a lower step 1 score and then do well in step 2. So that's the end of my talk. I wanted to provide some helpful resources for you guys. I mentioned Dr. Hagedorn, who's the urology advisor. I included her email here. She's been awesome about just asking questions about the interview process, getting some shadowing experience, hooking you up with any research mentors. She's been awesome. The AUA website is going to be your go-to as far as finding the, what specific dates are for your for the application process. It's going to change year to year, especially with COVID and then moving out of the pandemic. So I would keep that bookmarked and kind of look up the residency timeline there. You'll also want to make sure that you can get you register to get an ID number. You can get an ID number for free, but registering for the match is going to cost you some money. So just make sure that you do that early before you get deep into the interviewing process or the application process. The Texas Star is awesome. You'll get an email from the career advisor, and make sure you don't junk mail that. I did that and had to get it resent to me, and it was kind of a lifesaver just as far as figuring out how many applications I should do, what average step score, how competitive I felt I was. Getting a Weeder's Pocket Urology is important. Don't get that until 3rd year, end of 3rd year, or even 4th year when you're thinking about getting into your sub-I. It's a pretty thick book, a lot of detail in there, but it's awesome when you're running around on the floor. And then I included my email. You can reach out if you have any questions. I'm always available. That'll be my email for a while. And then I look forward to seeing some of you up on the interview trail. So come, if you're applying to the University of Minnesota, say hi, say you saw my interview, and hopefully you'll have a fun time. All right, take care.